Hi, Ben here and welcome back to the workshop, and today we're in the knife making department and I wanted to talk you through some of the different attachments that I've got for some of my grinders, the knife making grinders. And obviously for new knife makers and tool makers, there's obviously lots of information out there, and sometimes you get a little bit confused when people start talking about different parts or attachments that go on a grinder. So we just sort of thought it'd be good to actually talk you through some of my sort of setups that I use in the workshop. So this particular grinder itself is what we call a tag or a triple arm grinder, and this is made by Chris Williams out at Wilmont Grinders out in the States. These are some of my sort of really sort of beasts of bits of kit really. They really do work hard and we'll be grinding on these pretty much all day, so they work continuously. So you want a really robust grinder. Like I say, they're called triple arm grinders because you end up with these three separate slots. The great thing about Chris's grinder is that it's got these three slots with different adjustments, these locking sort of screws on there, so I can put different setups in there and also a tool rest and things like that, and it's just really versatile. This main attachment I've just slid into that top arm there is what we call a platen. So a platen is it's effectively a plate, a flat plate. You normally end up with two rollers, top and bottom, that you can actually use for sort of contouring, but the main section of the platen that you're using is this section here. Now when you get a platen, normally it will come with a mild steel plate there that will wear slightly if you're using it excessively. So all I've done is I've found and sourced a piece of carbide which is extremely hard wearing and attached that to that mild steel platen itself, so that means I can grind on there a long time and I get zero sort of deformation of that flat surface really, and that works really good. So what I'll do is I'll put a belt on and you can sort of see it when it's sort of set up ready for work. Oops, it might help if I actually tighten that. So that little handle just puts this top arm under tension, which basically puts that belt under tension so that it's working. Now the great thing about using the platen is if I slid a tool rest into there, I can use that for profiling all my blades. I can use it for grinding flat grinds and bevels and things like that. The only disadvantage of a platen is when you start using finer grits. We have on a belt what we call the splice. So basically belts are made up of one length of sandpaper that's basically cut, and then it has to be joined to make the correct length of belt, and you end up with this splice. Now they put it at an angle so obviously it doesn't sort of tear to pieces when it hits an edge when you're working with it, but they end up having to use a piece of tape normally on the back side of the sanding belt itself. Now when you're using very fine grits at relatively low speeds, what happens, even if you go to the effort of sanding down that splice, when you're using it at slow speeds and at fine grits, you get what we call a belt bump. So basically if you're going and you're grinding a bevel and trying to put a very smooth finish, as that slides past what you're working on, it basically makes it jump slightly. So it's very difficult to get very smooth finishes with very fine belts because of that belt splice. So certain times, especially if you're using a sort of a grinder for doing hollow grinds and stuff, you'll actually put in what we call a contact wheel. So you can get these in various sizes, and this is rubber, which is different hardnesses, and because the splice is running over that rubber, you don't get a noticeable belt bump. Now obviously rubber works great when it's on a wheel, but how can you get rubber onto a flat surface like that? So we'll walk down the line of grinders and I'll show you another attachment that you can get which tries to sort of minimize that belt bump. So this is what we call a rotary platen. So this slides into the grinder just like the platen did. And now this platen, this rotary platen, is made by Beaumont Metalworks out in the States again, and this is brilliant. What they've developed is this this rotary belt, which is basically like a drive belt that goes over these knurled contact wheels, so it stays in place. And they've also made it so that there's different distances between set pulleys, and you can also tension how tight that belt runs as well. So you can basically rotate it. So if you want a lot of deflection on this belt, you can obviously use this widest section, and if you don't want too much deflection, you can keep spinning it around until you get this narrowest distance between those contact wheels. Now I tend to use this section here for things like my convex grind, so on my parangs and my axes and things like that. So what that allows me to do is I can apply pressure when I'm grinding, and you can see that the belt itself deflects and deforms and creates that lovely convex grind. And because the belt is running on this soft rubber, when that splice comes round, you don't get that belt bump. So you've basically got a flat-ish grind like you would get off the platen, but you don't get the belt bump, so it's almost like morphing the contact wheel and the platen together. Now the only trouble with this rotary platen is because it's not backed up by anything, you won't get a true flat grind, because obviously depending on how you angle the tool or how much you push in, you will always get a sort of varying degree of deflection. So a slight improvement if you wanted to try and do sort of flattish grinds, but with the benefit of that rotary platen, is you can move down to the next attachment. Now this is a pretty smart invention. This was made by a company called Hardcore Products out in the States, and it was partly developed with a chap called Jerry Moen, who's a very famous knife maker out in the States, and they worked together and they developed this pretty much amazing bit of kit. It was the first of its kind, really. There's a few other people sort of trying to make it now, but this was the first sort of development of it. And what this combines is it combines the platen that we saw in the very first grinder and the rotary platen, and this is what we call a rotary carbide platen. So it's got the same sort of rotary rubber belt that we've got on the rotary platen, but it is backed up on the back of here is a piece of carbide, and it's pretty smart. If I take this out so you can see it a little bit easier, it's got an integrated cooling fan, so as the belt turns that rubber belt, it drives that cooling fan. So the carbide and that cooling fan keep your grinds and the steel very cool, stops the actual attachment overheating as well, and that can just slide into one of your grinders. This is actually running on a KMG from Beaumont Metalworks, and you've got the benefit of that lovely smooth sort of action that you get with either having a contact wheel or a rotary platen, so that rubber running over a flat surface, so you don't get any bump from your belt splice, but you've also got the benefit of it being backed up by a hard piece of flat carbide in this instance, and it gives you incredibly smooth flat grinds. So it's a pretty amazing bit of kit. I bought this a couple of years ago at Blade Show, where I actually got a chance to actually try this before I bought it, and I haven't had a great deal of time to play with it when I've been back in the workshop, because I bought this primarily for doing sort of very nice flat grinds. So only in the last couple of weeks really that I've been sort of dedicating a bit of time to learn how this works. So pretty impressed with how this piece of equipment works, and I'll show you some of the first blades that we've got coming off the carbide rotary platen. So this is what I mean when I say about a flat grind. So normally a lot of my tools have Scandi grinds, which are great for woodworking, but if you want something that's going to be a little bit thinner for sort of food prep or sort of like a hunting knife or something like that, then this full flat grind is pretty amazing really. It gives a very thin geometry. This has got a primary sort of secondary bevel on there. It's still got the burr on there at the moment because I haven't finished making this knife. This has just got the scales on ready for glue up, and I wouldn't hone it until it's actually finished. But you can see that we've got a very smooth finish. I've taken that to about a sort of 400 grit finish on there using a Trizac belt on the rotary platen, and I'm pretty impressed with the kind of results that you can get really. So hopefully using this piece of equipment, we're going to be able to offer different grinds that are going to be a bit more applicable for the sort of the outdoor pursuits market rather than just the bushcraft and the sort of the woodcraft scene. So hopefully we'll be able to offer some sort of good kitchen knives, sort of utility knives, and also some sort of hunting knives as well. So pretty excited about that. But yeah, thought it'd be a good opportunity to show you what we use in the workshop. Obviously it's kind of a bit of a luxury having 3 separate grinders, so I don't have to interchange these pieces of equipment as I want to make a knife. But obviously all these will fit in a standard triple arm grinder or a KMG or something like that. Most grinders from the States tend to always have this sort of 1.5 inch size sort of tool arm thickness, so they all pretty much fit. But yeah, that's pretty much my setup in the workshop. So hope you've enjoyed seeing what I use in the workshop itself, and if you've got any questions, please just feel free to drop us a line.